Is it a sin to have grape juice as an alternative to wine in the Eucharist?
Yes, it is. But the question is whose sin and what kind of sin is it? Part of the problem is that we tend to have sort of a toggle switch mentality. Is it a sin or not a sin? And we don't nuance it at all. There are corporate sins, there are cultural sins, there are societal sins, there are individual sins, and so on. So if a sin is defined as any lack of conformity to the Word of God, then to substitute grape juice in for wine that's not scriptural. That's not what the Bible said to do. It's not in keeping with what the Bible said. So in that sense, it's a sin. But you have to understand that the Bible ranks God's commands. He says there are two great commands: love God, love your neighbor. Jesus talks about those who tithe out of their spice rack, mint, dill, and cumin, but they neglect the weightier matters of the law. So I would say on the one hand, yes, it's a sin to observe the Lord's Supper with grape juice, a sin, because it's not God's design, it's not God's purpose. There are faulty assumptions going into that practice and so on. But back in the day when, before Christ Church went to weekly communion and before we went to serving wine in communion, I had come to the conviction that using grape juice in the Lord's Supper, which we then did monthly, at that time we were doing monthly, I'd come to the conclusion that serving grape juice was a sin. But I also believed, I think rightly, that splitting the body apart in a debate over the sign of unity, it would also be a sin and would be a much worse sin. So if I had just stood up one Sunday and said, okay, everybody, grape juice is not in the Bible, wine is, we're changing today, I would have eliminated one sin and I would have committed a much larger sin. So the question is, how do you get from here to here? So, and this is going to sound appalling to some people, and I think makes sense to others, but there was an extended period of time where when I was administering the Lord's Supper, I would privately to myself say, God, oh God, this is not in your word. We're using grape juice. We shouldn't be using grape juice. This is a sin. For what we're about to do, we give thanks, and please forgive it. I felt like Hezekiah allowing people to observe the Passover, although they were ceremonially unclean. It was that kind of thing. And so I would confess the sin regularly before committing it, if you will, asking God to do something with this. And when we were able to make the transition to wine and the transition to weekly communion, we were able to do it without sinning against charity and the sensitive consciences of those who had been taught poorly but differently earlier on. So I'm very grateful for that.